Hey, this is Matthew. Welcome back to Nerd News Today. Now, if you're a regular subscriber here to Nerd News Today, you already know that we're really big fans of pro wrestling, and especially myself, I really love ECW. And obviously, you guys just recently saw, we just got through looking at the entire retro line of ECW figures from original San Francisco toy makers, and that was pretty great. But of course, we're not done yet with ECW merch. So today, what we have in front of us here is an original vintage ECW program from April 23rd, 1999. Now, what you guys might not know is that I'm a big collector of programs. Obviously, I love the action figures, and I've got a lot of other different types of wrestling merchandise, which I've acquired over the years. But one of my favorite things to get has been programs. And I remember, in fact, my very first program ever in pro wrestling, which was from WWF back in probably 1991, 1992. I've always enjoyed them because they usually have some interesting articles. They've got typically some really great photos. There's a lot of really great things to love, and maybe we'll look one day at my entire program collection. But today, what we've got in front of us here is that ECW program. This is an original ECW program. You can see here it's definitely seen better days because there's a little bit of water damage on it. The paper's starting to get a little bit of yellow around the corners. But this is the legit thing. This is what you would have gotten if you were in New Jersey on this particular day watching ECW. So today we're going to take a look at what is inside this. Today we're going to take a look at what's inside this program and give you a little bit of historical context as to what was going on in ECW around then. So in 1999, there were 6 ECW pay-per-views. The first one being in January was Guilty as Charged in Kissimmee, Florida. That was followed March 21st by Living Dangerously, which is one of those must-see ECW pay-per-views, and May 16th, which had Hardcore Heaven in Poughkeepsie, New York. So this program that we're looking at right here is essentially in between Living Dangerously and Hardcore Heaven. However, we should add that there was another ECW event that had just happened weeks prior to this April 23rd event, and that was Ecw Cyberslam 1999. That was held, of course, in the ECW Arena in Philadelphia. The main event was an Ultimate Jeopardy match, which was a pretty balls-to-the-wall, extreme, hardcore wrestling matchup, and that also saw some other stuff happening, including Taz taking on Chris Candido, Ron Van Dam beating Too Cold Scorpio, and it was also Shane Douglas's final ECW match before he left the company and went to WCW. Cyberslam 99 is one of those cards that really nobody talks that much about because nothing really important happened on it, but it's actually a pretty solid night of wrestling, so if you want to check out an ECW show you haven't seen before, go ahead and take a look at Cyberslam 99. So the cover of this issue here features the ECW Television Championship title, and here we've got Rob Van Dam, who is the champion, and Jerry Lynn, who is the challenger. So at Living Dangerously 99, that's when Lynn and RVD met for the very first time, and it's, to this day, still one of the must-see ECW matches. So the question being, of course, on this program is, are RVD and Lynn meeting tonight in action? No, they're not, because this is a house show after all. But what is going on tonight? Well, we're going to find out right now. We're going to open up this thing and take a look, but yeah, again, folks, this is now, keep in mind, 1999, so chances are, if they're even making this on a computer, that's a pretty big deal, and they very well could be, but this could also still be the era of them just hand-cutting out things, and, you know, it's pretty primitive looking by all standards, even back from 1999. So let's go ahead, open this guy up, take a look at the first page here of this very, very thin program. So this is, of course, ECW, and yeah, they're not going to pay for extra pages. They're printing on both sides of the paper here. And this is black and white computer paper, nothing really fancy whatsoever. So our program here opens up with an article about the feud between Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn, which we just mentioned had already happened. And in fact, the first paragraph also mentions Cyberslam with that match with RVD and Too Cold Scorpio. It also goes on to discuss what Rob Van Dam has been doing so far, because at this point he's been now champion for a full year. And spoiler alert, as we know at this point, Rob Van Dam would hold that belt for, I believe it was actually 2 years, which is the record for the ECW Television Championship. And I think the only reason he actually lost it was because he had injured his leg, and if memory serves, I believe he was forced to relinquish the belt, so I don't think he necessarily lost it. You guys in the comments section can let me know what actually happened, but that's just off the top of my head what I'm kind of remembering. But yeah, this article here is basically just talk about that Lynn-RVD feud, and more importantly, it's really here to put over Jerry Lynn. So the majority of this article is in fact talking about what Jerry Lynn's career has been so far, letting folks know who he is, what he's done, what he's all about, and putting over the match, putting over how this is going to continue. And of course, most importantly, it's hyping up the next pay-per-view, which is going to be a theme in this program here. So what's neat to note here on the bottom is some of the headmast, some of the folks who worked on this issue. So the number one name that pops up, of course, is Gabe Sapolsky. Gabe was the publisher of this issue, and at this point we know Gabe for a lot of things he's done in pro wrestling. Gabe went to work for Paul Heyman back in 1993 when he started writing the newsletter for them. He was a recent graduate from Temple University, and somehow he got connected to Paul Heyman, and the two began working together pretty quickly. And this was apparently one of the responsibilities that Gabe had during his time in ECW, which was essentially, I believe, all the way till the company died. Once ECW did shut down, he went to work for RF Video for quite some time. He also was a co-founder of Ring of Honor with Rob Feinstein, the owner of RF Video. He went on to be the first vice president of Dragon Gate USA. Basically, he's done a lot in pro wrestling. If you guys want to learn more about what he's done, obviously you can check out his Wikipedia. There's plenty of articles about him, but he's definitely accomplished a lot in professional wrestling, and as a name worth noting. Right below that name, we have photos, and the first name that's in that is George Tahinos. George Tahinos is an independent photographer who specializes in professional wrestling, and he worked for ECW for quite so many years, but he's covered lots of other things. He's worked for many other clients, and chances are you've seen his photos time and time again. He's photographed CZW, he's photographed Dragon Gate. He's been around the block a few times, let's just put it that way. The other person credited here is Mark Stieglitz, and unfortunately I don't know anything about Mark, so if anybody out there does know anything about that name, go ahead and let me know. And below that, there's 3 other photographers credited here. That's Mark Stieglitz, Howard Kernotz, and Warren Bernstein. Kernotz has continued to work in professional wrestling and sports photography, and has quite an accomplished career, as does Warren Bernstein. But don't take my word for it, it's a little hard to be sure because there are a few different Warren Bernsteins out there who are photographers. But at the very least, there's at least one guy named Warren Bernstein who's still taking photos. As for Mark, I don't really know much about him, so if anybody out there has more information about what Mark's up to these days, please let me know in the comments. And there's also special thanks to Lita Heller and Copytech, so I'm assuming that's the folks who helped fund these programs and help get them out the door. So let's go ahead and jump over to the next page here. This page is now focusing on the story behind Just Incredible and Shane Douglas. So at this point, Shane Douglas has reformed the Triple Threat, but he's, as we mentioned, out the door. But what's really the more interesting part here is what's happening in this opening section here. And so it discusses Just Incredible coming to ECW one day, and Scott Hall showing up because Credible invited him to come visit an ECW event. And that is an actual real thing that happened, folks. So this is one of the cool things again about this. You know, as you saw with the Jerry Lynn side, we didn't really mention it, but they talk about him not being ECW. They talk about what else Jerry Lynn has done. Same thing over here. They're not ignoring the history, and that's one of the great things about ECW and why I think they got so popular, is because they acknowledge that there's competition out there and they freely talked about it, whether it be positive or negative. So in this case here, we're discussing Scott Hall coming, and this is the thing that you can hear from, I believe, multiple sides, but there actually is a video of Shane Douglas discussing it. And according to Shane Douglas, what happened was one day they were in an event, and out of nowhere, Scott Hall walks into the building and just kind of walks around. And most of the boys who are there are not too pleased to see him. In particular, Shane Douglas, of course, Tracy Smothers, Bam Bam Bigelow, Chris Candido, and some other folks that are there. Shane Douglas in particular, he had a pretty rough time during his WWF tenure, and Scott was certainly a part of that. So the way the story goes is that nobody really wanted to talk to Scott whatsoever. For the most part, they were all ignoring him, and they were looking towards Shane Douglas to do something about him. So Shane was pretty pissed even just seeing him walk into the building, and according to him, Paulie didn't want him going near him, didn't want him to punch him or cause a fight because he knew that was going to happen if those two confronted each other, mostly because he felt that it was a setup. And that setup would lead to Shane Douglas being arrested and therefore being unable to compete on that night. So instead, Shane decided, well, I can still hit him if it's self-defense. So he decided to go up to Scott Hall and try to rile him up to get him to throw the first strike and make it a little bit easier when the cops showed up. So Shane did his best to insult Scott Hall, and amazingly, Hall just took it and eventually just walked out, which disappointed, of course, everybody that was there that day waiting to see a fight. But that's essentially the story. And while this article itself is, not the most interesting, it just, again, talks about Shane Douglas, Lance Storm, Just Incredible. Really what is kind of neat on that topic of Scott Hall is that Scott Hall would, in fact, show up again in ECW. He'd come there in about November, I think the end of October or November 2000, and he showed up to do 3 house shows. Scott Hall never made it on TV, but he did wrestle Sally Graziano, he wrestled Rhino, and he wrestled Just Incredible. Footage exists of the Just Incredible match and the Sal E match. Nothing out there for Rhino, though, as far as I can tell. But yeah, believe it or not, Scott Hall actually did compete in ECW when he was still contracted to WCW. So let's go ahead now, see what's happening on the other side here. And well, this is just some information about some other house shows. And what's cool is that this is pretty up to date because it's talking about April 15th, April 16th, April 17th, April 22nd. So we're really up to date because this is now April 23rd, so they've got everything, including what happened last night, which means they really hustled to print these things up. What's kind of fun here to look at these names is that you'll see here in this first one here, Chris Chetty beats Rhino Richards. And it's kind of fun how they spelled Richards right there. But yeah, at the time, Rhino was going by Rhino Richards. He wasn't just Rhino yet. So essentially, Rhino Richards was more or less his jobber name. And we've also got a Skull Von Crush sighting. Skull Von Crush was the name of Vito Lagrasso, who would eventually join WCW, where sadly I think he's best known for being a hardcore champion and wearing a dress. But he had also been in WWF, he'd been in Memphis, and he even appeared on TV once on ECW on TNN back in '99. But that would happen a few months after this magazine came out. So the way they formatted this article, I gotta say, it's not the greatest to look at. It's basically just lumps of text with a lot of semicolons, which are there to help break up the matches. And it's really ugly to look at. You know, I thought they would have at least maybe bullet pointed it. This is just the graphic designer and me just pointing out how I would have done things differently. But yeah, I would have just bullet pointed things, which would have been a lot easier. Because yeah, this is just so tough to read. And the fact that it is that just classic typewriter font doesn't do it any favors. But it is really nice that they're acknowledging what's been happening in current events, and it does keep you up to date. That part I really, really like. In doing so, this kind of helps you fill in the blanks for storylines because, you know, at this point, the internet is a thing, which is great, and ECW message boards were a thing as well. But for folks who are maybe new to ECW, for folks who might just be coming for the first time ever to check out a show, this is a really great way to get everybody invested and understanding, and to get them on board for all of the ECW action that they're about to see on this night. So even though I don't like the way it looks, it's actually a very good thing. So now let's go ahead and check out this next page, and we're almost, in fact, done with this already. Believe it or not, this is actually a second to last page of this program here. It's not a very thick program, but what this one here is now is just basically telling you, again, who people are, what they're doing, what the plan is for the night. So first up, we've got a little mention of Taz, and talks about how Taz unified the ECW and FTW belts at Living Dangerously, which he did in a match against Sabu, another really good match. And again, if you watch Living Dangerously, clearly you're going there to check out the Rob Van Dam Jerry Lynn match, but you should stay for the Taz and Sabu match. There's also a little mention here of Sabu. Yeah, I go back and forth saying Sabu and Sabu. I don't know why. I actually met him at a signing last year, in fact, and it was really embarrassing because, again, I just say his name wrong. I don't know why I do it wrong. I don't say the name it's supposed to be, which is Sabu. I always say Sabu. And, you know, he was as polite as he could be, but he is a little curmudgeonly, so, yeah, I'm just lucky he didn't have a spike that day in his boot or something. But, yeah, we got a little mention about him, what he's been doing lately, and also a little bit of his history, so that's kind of interesting. And there's another little text box up here talking about the Dudleys coming to wrestle tonight. That's not really too interesting, but what I do like in particular is this box here, which is International Stars in Action. So this box is talking about Super Crazy, Tajiri, and Little Guido. So my first time seeing ECW was actually ECW on TNN. And one of the first matches I remember seeing was in fact a three-way between Little Guido, Super Crazy, and Tajiri. And yeah, the hardcore stuff was great, and I loved seeing some of the stuff that was going on at that point. But what really left the biggest impression on me was that international triple threat match. And so these guys are basically repeating that for many, many matches. And really, this trio of guys had a ton of great matches, one-on-one and together as a unit. And it's also just really neat seeing how these guys all evolved together. He was still basically doing the same gimmick he had over in Japan. He was just wearing generic trunks, generic kick pads, generic boots. Nothing visually too exciting about the guy. And even his wrestling style, it connected with the fans, but it still didn't quite have the spice that it would later on. As for Little Guido up until then had kind of been mostly a comedy wrestler. He was teamed up with FBI, which was also quite often considered a comedy team, even though they weren't in a lot of ways. But Little Guido was able to eventually evolve and be taken much more seriously as this shoot fighter, this real traditional catch wrestling guy, because he has a legitimately great pedigree in wrestling. So yeah, once Super Crazy came into the fold, and all these guys were able to mix together, and Tajiri at that point also got those black karate pants. Yeah, at that point then, those guys all had magic together. And so it's really nice here just having this explanation of them, and again, basically kind of reiterating what I just said here and getting up to speed on who they are, what they're going to do tonight. And then there's also a mention here of one other guy who didn't really quite take off in ECW as much as they probably would have liked him to, and that's El Mosco. El Mosco de la Merced, the Mosquito of Mercy. El Mosco had a really big career in Mexico. He spent a lot of time in AAA, and he came over to ECW when they were starting to bring in more of the international guys, especially the luchadors. And, you know, he just didn't quite enjoy the same success as everybody else. But he was there for a while and put on some good matches if you can find them, which are not too hard to do. So finally here we go to the back, the last page. This is the end of our program. It's telling you where this event is happening here, which is St. Mary's High School. It's in South Amboy, New Jersey, Friday, April 23rd at 8 p.m. And what are the matches? Well, I don't know. So that's the interesting thing about this program here is that it doesn't actually list who's wrestling who. We have a list of the players here, which is kind of nice, and what I really like is that each one of them has a tagline. But yeah, this thing doesn't say who's wrestling who, and I guess that's one of those things that's just subject to change, and they must have been deciding on the fly, I guess. But it is a little bit surprising to see who was actually competing and who wasn't competing. But luckily for you, ECW has solved that problem because they've put a scorecard here, because technically what they've put here is not a match listing. It's the Extreme Scorecard. It's telling you who the players are, it's telling you how to spell their names, and now it's up to you to do the work for them. So it's actually a pretty great gimmick. You get to write in who did what, who won who, I guess. It's actually kind of an interesting way to do it, make it a little more interactive. When I've gone to like house shows before, or even my very first televised SmackDown, they actually had a single paper insert that was there telling you what the matches were, or at least telling you what some of the matches were and telling you who else is going to show up that night. But in this case, yeah, all you know is who's going to be there in theory, and well, again, the rest is up to you. So I wanted to get some answers for you guys, and I decided to bring this with me today. So what we have here is ECW Magazine, Volume 1, Issue 2. This is from August 1999. It's got Lance Storm here on the cover, as you can see. And yeah, I already bookmarked the page here just to jump us, because one of the nice things about the magazine is that it also acknowledges those house shows. It lets us know who was doing what, where people were. And yeah, I brought this with me today to do this video because I wanted to check and see if we got some answers here. So yeah, we've got April 2nd, April 10th, April 3rd right there, 15th, 16th, 17th, and then when we turn the page, oh, we've got nothing. Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't think this house show actually even gets listed. So the ECW magazine was a bi-monthly magazine, and unfortunately as part of that here, you're seeing some house show results. And yeah, it goes back a little bit further, it goes into some of the stuff in March, but sadly this issue ends on April 17th, so we're missing a few of the house shows that would have taken place around the time of the program that I got here. And I don't have issue 3 with me, unfortunately, but luckily I was able to get the results here online. Hey guys, a little addendum here to the video. I actually was able to go ahead and get the other issue of ECW Magazine, just because I wanted to check if it was in this one too. Let's go ahead and find out. And yeah, the answer is no. It completely skips over those house shows. This one goes right into May, so we don't get any of the end of April stuff that would have been represented in this program in any of the ECW magazines, apparently. We just completely missed the end of April and the start of May. So yeah, there you go, folks. We'll never get that information in the magazine. But hey, at least you can go to ecwwrestling.com and get it right there. At least you could have if this was still in 1999 and that still existed. Anyway, back to you, Matthew in the past. Now what's interesting to note here is that yes, there was a show going on in New Jersey, but on this same night, over in Buffalo, New York, they were having a taping of ECW Hardcore TV. And that event saw Axl Rotten and Balls Mahoney defeat the FBI. And we also got Devon Dudley with Bubba Ray at his side taking on Rob Van Dam for the tag team titles. Yeah, that's right, it's a one-on-one match for the tag team titles. And oddly enough, Devon wins the match and the tag titles change hands. But as for this particular night in South Amboy, what we did get is Little Guido defeating Prodigy. And Prodigy, his name is not mentioned in here, so yeah, so much for that. We got Danny Doring defeating Skull Von Crush. Axl Rotten defeated Steve Corino, who you can see right down there. States he's not a hardcore, but a technical wrestler. Well, at this point, Steve Corino was still kind of a jokey wrestler, so yeah, this match is mostly for him to get hit in the head with a chair a bunch of times. Spike Dudley, you see him right here, he did compete. He won a Battle Royale. Now, as for the international guys we just mentioned before, Super Crazy and El Mosco teamed up to defeat Tajiri and Taka Michinoku. So what's interesting to note about Taka, by the way, is that Taka and El Mosco, in fact, did wrestle each other. And I believe that match happened either days before or days after WrestleMania 15. So Taka was doing some double duty there. So we know that the Dudleys are going to be on this event tonight. And yes, the Dudleys are there, and they're teaming up to take on Chris Chetti and Nova, who they obviously defeated. As for our ECW World Champion, Taz took on the winner of that Battle Royale, Spike Dudley, and well, as you can imagine, he destroyed Spike. Following that, Tommy Dreamer defeated Just Incredible as they continued their feud. And for the main event of the evening, we got the barn burner, that is Rob Van Dam taking on Balls Mahoney for the TV championship, I would assume. And obviously, Rob Van Dam walks out of there the winner. So in terms of house shows, I mean, yeah, I would have been pretty happy actually seeing this show. You got a lot of pretty good stuff there. You're going to get Taz, you're going to get a Battle Royale, you're getting some great Lucha Libre International style action. Tommy Dreamer and Just Incredible, I'm sure, was pretty fun to watch as well. There's some decent stuff in this card, and it wasn't bad. And in case you're curious, the following night, the ECW roster showed up in Queens at the Elks Lodge, which basically saw a different permutation of a lot of these names, along with a few other different ones showing up. So on the following night, we got to see Nova defeat Little Guido. Jerry Lynn wrestled on that night, and he defeated Taka Michinoku, which I would love to have seen. We also got to see the international guys in action once again, but this time, different combination. This time, Tajiri and Spike Dudley actually defeat Super Crazy and Mosco. We also got to see Tommy Dreamer defeating Lance Storm, Skull Von Crush getting revenge on Danny Doring and beating him. Balls Mahoney defeating New Jack somehow, and finally Rob Van Dam defeating Bubba Ray Dudley. And the next house show that would follow that will be April 29th in Palmetto, Florida, but we'll save that for another day. Now, believe it or not, St. Mary's High School allegedly managed to pull in 800 people for this event. That's the number that I've got listed here, courtesy of ProWrestlingHistory.com. I don't quite know where they got those numbers from, but they're saying they got 800 people in there. That's pretty nuts, and I really want to see the size of this high school. But then again, this is ECW, it's ECW territory, so I could see them pulling in those numbers because ECW fans are rabid. And add on to the fact that they're in Jersey, well, now we're talking some really serious rabies. So that's our look here at this ECW program from April 23rd, 1999. And the cool thing about these ECW programs is, yeah, they're not exactly the coolest looking. They're just literally pieces of paper stapled together. It's a vintage 90s staple right there. But what's really nice about these is if you're looking to get a piece of ECW merch that's not the usual stuff, the programs are actually pretty affordable. They're getting harder and harder to find, of course, because, you know, they're not the greatest quality paper, they're not the greatest quality anything, period. And their shelf life might not be the longest. But yeah, this guy here I got for about $10, believe it or not. And you can find these on eBay for roughly around the same. None of them are going to really cost you that much money because, again, they're just 3 sheets of paper stapled together. But that said, they're really enjoyable reads. They're really fun. And you know what I'd love to do is go to some signings once autograph signings can happen again and get this signed by the wrestlers. So if you love ECW and you're in the market for something a little bit different, ECW programs are totally the way to go. And by the way, since I just happen to have this here, again, here's just a quick look at that ECW magazine. I'm not going to show you the inside of it, unfortunately, because, well, you know what, guys? We're going to save that for next time, because we're going to take a look at all 6 issues of the ECW magazine. That's right, there's only 6 of them. I've got them all. I wish I'd brought issue 3 with me today to actually take a look and see if they listed this house show, but hey, that's my mistake. But yeah, we're going to take a look at all 6 issues and break down what's going on inside them. So I hope you'll stay tuned and stick around for that, because those are going to be some really good videos. So I hope that if you're new here, you're going to please subscribe to our channel and make sure to turn on notifications to see when that next video pops up. And if you're a hardcore ECW fan, I want to know if you've ever gone to an ECW house show. I want to hear your ECW reports. Let me know if you were an original fan of the company or if you're new to the game. Give me some ECW memories, guys. So until next time, I'm Matthew. This has been Nerd News Today, and we'll see you here next time because things are going to keep getting extreme.